The Young and the Restless spoilers next week. Update August 4th to August 8th 2025. Tension in Genoa City was no longer a subtle undercurrent, it had become the storm cloud hanging over every conversation, every glance, every decision. And at the center of that storm stood Jill and Billy, mother and son, legacy and rebellion, locked in a cycle of clashing ideals that neither could walk away from. Chancellor was more than a company. To Jill, it was the blood and sweat of generations. To Billy, it was the one thing he was never supposed to touch, yet always blamed for breaking. Their latest confrontation was less of a disagreement and more of a reckoning. Jill stormed into his office, voice sharp, accusing him of using Chancellor as a weapon against Victor, a vendetta thinly disguised as ambition. Billy shot back, not with cruelty but with fire, demanding to know how she could have handed the company over to the Newmans and expected him to simply smile. He accused her of selling out his legacy for stability. She accused him of being addicted to chaos. They screamed. They cried. And neither backed down. Because deep down, they were mirrors of each other, both too stubborn, too proud, too wounded to admit that love could coexist with betrayal. Elsewhere in the city, Kyle faced a very different kind of confrontation, one that required silence, not shouting. For days, he had avoided Claire's eyes. Her questions grew more careful, her touch more hesitant. She sensed the truth, but she wanted to be wrong. And Kyle, desperate to salvage what remained, finally sat her down. His confession was halting, carefully curated. He admitted that something had happened with Audra in Nice. That it began as a test, a trap to see if she was working for Victor. That he pushed the limits to expose her. Claire listened, face unreadable. He stopped short of revealing everything. The kiss, the closeness, the line he crossed that was not part of the plan. He presented a version of the truth, clean enough to avoid complete collapse, dirty enough to seem honest. But Claire was no fool. Her silence stretched long enough to become deafening. Then she thanked him, stood up, and walked out. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply left him alone with the truth he was too afraid to tell. In another part of town, Chelsea's quiet hopes were unraveling. She had watched Adam drift further from empathy, from compromise, from light. When she overheard Victor ordering him to coordinate a smear campaign against Billy, under the guise of team strategy and corporate duty, her stomach twisted. She confronted Adam, voice trembling not with anger but with concern. She told him she understood his need to please Victor, but that dragging Billy through the mud would only deepen the wounds between them all. She asked him to resist. To pause. To be better. Adam didn't respond right away. Because part of him still wanted to listen. But another part, the darker, more wounded part, was tired of being asked to take the higher road when no one else seemed to. And yet, Adam did not move forward with the article that night. He waited. Meanwhile, Claire and Kyle regrouped, their relationship hanging by a thread. They needed something concrete, something that could ground them again. The apartment. They decided to make a final appeal to Adam, to ask him directly to sell the unit they'd been dreaming of. They approached him carefully, Claire doing most of the talking, her tone measured, her grief tucked behind her spine like armor. Kyle, beside her, was quiet, whether from guilt or strategy, no one could tell. Adam listened, arms crossed, mind ticking. The request was simple. The implications were not. Selling the apartment would mean defying Victor. It would mean handing over a symbolic piece of leverage to the very couple Victor wanted to separate. Adam promised to think about it. Which, in his world, meant he already had. By Friday, the pressure cooker reached its boiling point. Victor stormed into Adam's office, furious that the article on Billy had not gone live. He barked orders, accused Adam of growing soft, of being distracted by Chelsea's sentimentality. Adam stood his ground, I barely. He reminded Victor that not every battle needed to be scorched earth. Victor dismissed it, cold and commanding. But the exchange didn't end when Victor left. Chelsea had been in the hall. She heard it all. And this time, she didn't just ask Adam to reconsider. She told him clearly, emotionally, and without hesitation, that if he went through with it, if he used Billy as a pawn in yet another war orchestrated by Victor, then she would be done. Not because she loved Billy, but because she couldn't love Adam if he continued choosing cruelty over compassion. By the week's end, everyone was forced to choose sides. Jill chose legacy, even if it meant fighting her son. Billy chose war, even if it cost him his soul. Kyle chose to manipulate truth, but lost trust. Claire chose distance, but not yet goodbye. Adam stood between his father's wrath and his own crumbling humanity. And Chelsea, heart-aching, chose to stand for something, even if it meant standing alone. In Genoa City, loyalty is currency, but truth is always the debt no one wants to pay. And now, the bills have come due. Grief in Genoa City had always come in waves, but for Jill, the death of Chance in France was not a wave, it was a tsunami that pulled everything from beneath her feet. One phone call had upended her world, shattering whatever fragile sense of peace she had convinced herself she still possessed. The news hit her with a violence she hadn't expected, not because she didn't fear it, but because some part of her still believed that Chance, ever resilient, ever dedicated, would always find a way back home. Now he never would. And when the weight of that reality became too heavy, Jill turned to the only person within reach, Billy. He had always been the son she could scream at, the one who could absorb her pain without turning away. But this time, her grief came laced with fury. She accused him of recklessness, of leaving Chancellor vulnerable, of distracting her with wars against Victor while her grandson bled out in a country she never should have let him go to alone. She didn't know the details. Not yet. But it didn't matter. The loss had to land somewhere, and Billy, tangled in his own self-made crises, was the most convenient target. Billy stood in silence as his mother hurled words soaked in sorrow and regret. For once, he didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself. Because deep down, he feared she might be right. He had pushed too hard, too fast, blinded by a need to win, to reclaim, to redefine his legacy. And somewhere along the way, Chance had been pulled into the orbit of that chaos. Whether Billy had meant for it or not, the guilt settled in his chest like concrete. But even in the middle of the storm, Billy knew he couldn't break. Not now. Not with Kane circling. Not with Victor watching. Not with the weight of Chancellor still hanging in the balance. Across town, Nikki Newman stood at her window, wine untouched in her hand, watching the city as if it might offer her answers she could not find in her own home. With Victor more ruthless than ever, Adam unmanageable, and Claire teetering on emotional collapse, Nikki had never felt more powerless. And so, she did the one thing few expected, she turned to Jack. Their history was complicated, tangled in decades of passion, betrayal, and brief peace. But right now, Nikki needed stability. She needed someone who understood the stakes without needing to control them. Jack listened without judgment, his concern for Nikki still evident despite all that had passed between them. She asked for his help, not just in navigating Victor's growing obsession with dominance, but in protecting the people caught in the crossfire. Jack agreed, not because he sought to undermine Victor, but because he saw Nikki unraveling, and he could not stand by and do nothing. Victor, meanwhile, was deep in his own machinations. The loss of Chance was a strategic setback more than a personal one, but even he understood that emotions were valuable leverage. He knew Kane would exploit the chaos, would try to position himself as a savior to those mourning. And Victor refused to let that happen. He needed someone sharp, someone both empathetic and calculating. He needed Lily. Her recent grief had made her fragile, yes, but also focused. She understood pain. She understood betrayal. And she hated Kane just enough to be useful. Victor approached her with precision, not demanding, not coercing, simply offering her something she already wanted, justice. Or at least, the illusion of it. He asked her to help dismantle Kane's growing influence, to serve as both witness and weapon. Lily didn't say yes immediately. But she didn't walk away either. And Victor knew that was enough, for now. At the same time, Phyllis Summers had begun drawing her own battle lines. Watching alliances form around her, Jack and Nikki, Victor and Lily, Kane and Billy, she realized how close she was to being squeezed out. And Phyllis didn't do powerless. She had built her entire identity on resilience, on vengeance cloaked in charm. She wasn't about to lose her place now. Not with Audra slithering her way into Kyle's life again. Not with Diane still whispering in Jack's ear. Not with Chancellor hanging in the air like a crown waiting for a victor. Phyllis began making quiet moves, contacting old allies, digging into financials, watching, listening. She didn't speak her intentions aloud. She didn't need to. Everyone who had ever underestimated her lived to regret it. And then there was Audra. Months earlier, Victor had approached her with an offer that was less business proposal and more assignment. He would fund her cosmetics empire. He would give her reach, influence, power. In return, she was to seduce Kyle, not for passion, but for clarity. Victor believed Claire's bond with Kyle was a threat. He believed Kyle, like his father, was too soft. And he wanted Audra to expose him. To force him to reveal the parts of himself that Claire refused to see. So in Nice, Audra gave everything. She played the seductress flawlessly, towing the line between temptation and betrayal with a grace only she could manage. She studied Kyle's weaknesses, his need to feel important, his lingering resentment toward Jack, his hunger for independence, and she used them like tools. The problem was, somewhere along the way, the game blurred. Kyle stopped being a mission. And Audra, though she'd never admit it, stopped being immune. When he kissed her, it wasn't staged. It wasn't strategy. And that made it dangerous. Now, with Claire unraveling, Kyle racked with guilt, and the footage from Nice possibly in Kane's possession, Audra found herself in a perilous limbo. Victor hadn't yet withdrawn support. But he hadn't extended further trust either. She knew how he operated. The moment she became expendable, she would be cut. So Audra doubled down, reasserted herself at Vibrante, hovered near Adam, stayed visible. She reminded everyone of her value before anyone could question it. But in the shadows of these power plays, one truth loomed larger than the rest: Chance was dead. And that death was no longer just a tragedy, it was becoming a catalyst. Jill would demand answers. Billy would carry the blame. Lily might seek revenge. Nikki would pursue protection. Jack would be pulled into yet another war. Phyllis would strike first before being cornered. Victor would consolidate. Audra would twist the narrative to survive. And Chelsea, heartbroken, silent, watching Adam slip into a version of himself she didn't recognize, would have to decide where her line was. How far she would go to keep her family intact. Or whether she, too, would walk away. Genoa City had always been a city of ghosts, of past loves, old feuds, unfinished business. But now, the ghosts were taking shape again. They were calling in debts, demanding vengeance, unearthing secrets. And this time, there would be no peace until someone paid with blood or truth.